Hi friends, I'm back with another COVID report, 2 weeks since the last time that I have told you guys what's going on. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you. And, I always hope that I only have good news, but that's not necessarily the case this time. There is some good news, but also some not so great news. You can see that we have a persistent global rise. Hotspots in Europe and Russia continue. And unfortunately, cases are again rising in the US, although in California they have plateaued. Hospitalizations are also rising in the US, with a slow decrease lately in California, and vaccination is up. Mortality was decreasing nicely, but there again has been a recent plateau in US and California. So when we think about vaccination, you can see that when you compare us to overall the other first world nations, we continue to lag a bit. We have not been able to break that 60% of the share of the population fully vaccinated. When you look at how many of us have been vaccinated, it's 196 million, which is good. And now there's been a good amount of people receiving the booster dose as well. When you break this down by age, you can see that we're doing pretty well in the age over 65 group, but not as well in the lower ages. You can see here that administered doses have been going up lately in the month of November, that we are, and again now at 1.52 million per day. And at first I thought this may be just because of the new booster doses that people were getting. However, when you look at this graph, you can see that although there is a big jump with the additional dose, that's that yellow line, there's also a significant increase in the people who have gotten at least one dose. New reports of people getting vaccinated with at least one dose. So that is significant and encouraging. Because of that, you can see that this prediction of when 94% of the population will be fully vaccinated has come closer to us again at the end of April. When we look at where people are getting vaccinated and how this is increasing over time, you can see there's still the same familiar holdouts that seem to be lagging a bit behind the rest of the country, but some areas have had significant increases over the last couple of weeks. When you look at California in particular, vaccination status by group, when you look at the entire population fully vaccinated over age 12, this is actually a little lower than what I told you 2 weeks ago, 67% instead of around 73%. And that has changed on multiple websites. There likely was a data adjustment when they looked over everything and combed through it closely. So we're at 67% overall over age 12, and over age 65, you can see, unfortunately, we're lagging the rest of the country by quite a bit, just at 77.7%. When you look specifically at Santa Clara County, we are doing really well in the age over 17, we're at 90.3%. Even in our age 5 to 17, we are at 40% population vaccinated in that younger age group. And then in the older age group, we are doing quite well at 95%, doing better than the US overall and definitely better than California as a state. When we look at cases globally, unfortunately, you can see this continued rise of this, what looks really like a fourth surge, 16% increase over the last 2 weeks. And when you look at the hotspots overall on a map, you can really see that the story still lies within Western Europe, but definitely some hotspots re-emerging like the US, like Chile, like Southeast Asia. When you look at these specific countries with case rates compared to us, I told you the last time about Belgium, how they're in a crisis, and unfortunately that crisis continues, it has not abated. And certainly our line is not rising as steeply as theirs, or even as steeply as Germany's or the UK's, but we are starting to rise. When you look at this in our own graph, you can see this towards the tail end of this graph, this rise again, and there has been an increase of 29% in the last 14 days. What used to be this sort of band just affecting the northern states and the Mountain West has now started to creep downwards. And this may be reflective of the fact that the winter months have started and it is becoming colder further south in the country. When you look at cases in California, thankfully this has not seen a rise yet, perhaps because we have not seen very cold temperatures yet here in the state. There's been a slight decrease in our plateau, even about 17% down in the last 2 weeks. Santa Clara County, you can see, is pretty stable. San Mateo County, again, you can see is pretty stable as far as cases go. Stanford in particular, you can see that we have had a recent bump. Many of you may have heard of this rash of cases, sort of pod of cases rising within the row houses in the undergraduate campus. But other than that, we've been held pretty steady. And even with that, you can see our positivity rate is still very low, overall 0.09%. This holds true for the Stanford faculty, postdocs, and staff. Overall, our positivity rate is just 0.07%, doing quite well here on campus. When you start thinking about the variants, again, Delta variant really is the whole story. Over 99.9% of cases continues to be really the only variant of interest in the US. However, because this AY.4.2, which is a sort of Delta plus variant, it's of a Delta lineage, but it has globally been increasing in the share of cases that it is causing on its own. And you can see, you should disregard that sharp downward turn in that first graph. That's just noise and incomplete data at the end of the graph. But really this exponential rise is the true data. And you can see that it's claiming about 12% of global cases overall. Now, when we look at this middle graph, you can see that in the United States, the prevalence is much, much lower. Our graph doesn't even go any higher than 1.5%. And then when you go to California, our graph doesn't go any higher than 0.5%. So really not a variant that we need to be concerned about currently, but because of this slow, steady global rise, certainly it's something that we will continue to pay attention to. When you look at the variants here in Santa Clara County, again, the vast majority are Delta. There remain this smattering of other types of variants. Mu and Lambda continue to have some cases, but really nothing of concern at this point here. When you look at the pediatric population, there has been, again, a slight uptick in the last 2 weeks, back up to 25.1%. If you recall, it was 24% of all cases that were pediatric cases. So again, a little bump, not quite to our peak of October, but much higher than our prior to the Delta surge of 14.6%. Thankfully, hospitalizations and mortality remain very, very low in this population. This is just to illustrate why some of this might be happening, and that is simply that in a place like Nebraska, for example, where this Douglas County is, that their overall COVID rates are now higher than the previous high point recorded within the Delta wave. And so definitely there is a surge happening in the northern areas of the country. And you can see that in this graph, when you look at that broken down by age, the older population, sort of 50s and above, have kind of remained in the same sort of amount of cases being recorded and reported week after week. However, when you look at the lower age population, 30s and below, these age groups are starting to have more and more a share of cases, and therefore the overall case count is rising. When you look at hospitalizations in the US, you can see again there is an uptick at the end of our graph. When you look at California in particular, there's sort of a plateau and perhaps even a decrease lately, so that's good. And overall, you can see that is reflected in the over age 65 age group, contributing most to that. Here in Santa Clara, there's been a bit of a plateau in hospitalizations, and in San Mateo, again, a bit of a plateau. San Francisco, thankfully, continues to decrease as far as hospitalizations go, but the Bay Area overall has plateaued. When you look at mortality nationally, it is continuing to decrease, but recently it has plateaued slightly. When you look at mortality in California, definitely a plateau. You can just see this jagged up and down at the end of this graph. And when you look specifically at Santa Clara County, there's been a bit of a plateau, but a slight decrease in the last 2 weeks, just 21 deaths recently. And just to bring it all back around, just to compare again, the cases and deaths according to vaccination status here in the state of California, if you are unvaccinated, you are 6.9 times more likely to contract a COVID-19 infection. And if you are unvaccinated, you are 16.5 times more likely to die of COVID-19 than a fully vaccinated person. So with that, I'll stop sharing my screen. I hope everyone goes out and gets vaccinated. I hope you all stay safe and healthy. And I hope you all have a happy Thanksgiving and holiday. I will see you next time.